To another fun edition of B3 Final Mile. Only two B's, but we have a super sub here today with us, a good friend and a longtime customer, Lance Roberts from OnWay Transport and OnWay Logistics, based in Michigan. So good Midwestern company, like close by to where the Bryans are all at. And wanted to share kind of what their website, looks like, and talk with Lance about what they have going on and how they approach some of the hot button issues that we've touched on through time here while we've been doing these videos. So on that note, I'm going to stop sharing the website and unveil Lance and Brian Palazzi. So Lance, welcome. Glad to have you here. Thanks for doing this, but can you share with us some of your history and your experience in the transportation logistics space?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, both of you. Yeah, so Lance Roberts, been in the transportation logistics space 35 plus years. Started a long time ago, working at a warehouse all the way up to going to work for Roadway in the early 90s. Saw just about everything you could see, working the docks to the office, insurance, claims. I was a claims manager, so, kind of near and dear to my heart was always trying to be proactive to prevent things from happening and learning, slip and falls, accidents, workers' comp, and dealing with those issues on the dock. Then moved into sales, did that for a couple of years with Roadway, and then went into the broker space. When I went over there, having to learn as a freight broker, you're now a middleman between the carrier and the customer. And when a customer has a problem, usually the carrier is going to deny, the customer is going to deny, and you're caught in the middle trying to make both sides meet. And one of the interesting things was in 2007, we developed a broken seal policy that nobody else had. So got to work with a couple insurance companies a long time ago, building a policy that protected food and food safety in transport. So, very close to insurance and understanding that world for a while. In 2010, opened my own doors, ran a company from 0 to 65 million, building programs and procedures around food safety and some of that on the brokerage side, but then ended up opening a trucking company and learning the world of being fully asset based and having to deal with the insurance and the risks over there, because you're really driving a probably 100-foot billboard down the road, 55-foot trailer plus a couple signs on the doors telling everybody, send me a bill, so you kind of learn about that. Went back into brokering for a while, then did some consulting. And when I went to the consulting, I started doing turnarounds, trucking companies, expansion, startups. And then in 2021, I believe I met Tom and Lavia from OnWay, and I was consulting at the time and got moved into the final mile space, which it's interesting seeing the trucking industry and how regulatory and how the asset base and the brokers, how their insurance policies are. And then you come to the final mile world, and it's a little Wild West out here. And you kind of start seeing things a little differently, like the fraud, the claims. It's just a whole different world versus, what seems so scripted in trucking and logistics and the freight brokerage side. So
don't say it too loud, our underwriters are listening to you.
Well, it's different. And that's the interesting part of the final mile space, because you're not dealing with a trucking company that has certain insurance requirements and the government requires it. You're dealing with, and I always say, mom in a minivan. You're dealing with somebody, driving their car, their pickup truck, to a cargo van. Some of it is a little tighter and stricter, and it's how do you, as a small entity, grow and protect yourself? And that's the challenging part, because in trucking and freight brokerage, you have to hit certain things just to open your doors. And in final mile, you can go work for Uber and not have half of those things. You could work for DoorDash, and you just need a car and sign an agreement and you're off and running.
Yeah. We always kind of kick around and say, like, hey, those worlds, those pieces of transportation, those verticals are a little more black and white in terms of the regulations and the rules and the established flow. And God bless the final mile, it is more shades of gray probably than black and white most days. And it touches on those other two industries a lot too, right? Mm-hmm. Like you get into fleet, you get into non-asset based, it's a real melting pot of risk.
Well, and then you have the people that can be in a car, be in a van, and have a box truck, and you you run into these small entities that can run into that. And in some states, you don't need an authority. You just need a chauffeur's license to drive a box truck. And that just kind of blew my mind that, it's kind of like comparing a truck driver to a guy driving an RV down the road. They're both the same length. One guy's pulling a boat and Jeep behind him, and he's about 100 foot long, and he doesn't need anything. He just needs to rent one and go.
Yeah.
But it's interesting though, because you've seen it from both sides of the fence, on the trucking side, the brokerage side, and now in the final mile space, it's a blend of both, right? So you're well prepped for that.
It is. It's interesting. And that was one of the things when I was consulting for OnWay at the beginning, was understanding how are they structured? How are they set up? And then, the vision that Tom and Lavia had was, how do we, change the industry, not just for ourselves, but for others, and really proactively get set up and build things in the right space. And all I can talk to is because I wasn't from the final mile space. I don't know the difference. When I first got here, it was leaning on our insurance companies, because I've worked with them, and asking those questions, and what is required? What do we need? And then building processes and procedures to protect us, because again, as a freight broker, you can buy software that validates your trucking authority, your safer scores, right? You can check those boxes and give yourself the ability to sleep at night, because you did your due diligence. And over here, it's a little bit different. We had to structure it different. We had to proactively change our agreement language, build processes to kind of maneuver around mom in the minivan, because mom doesn't have a DOT authority, dropping off the kids, and then I'm going to go move a box of blood to a hospital. It's just a different change. And so how do we, as a company, build the processes and procedures to protect mom in the minivan, protect OnWay, protect our clientele, and ensure that everybody's on the up and up with everything going forward. So, that's kind of the vision of OnWay. As we grow and learn, we constantly try to get proactive in those spaces. And it's partnering with, like our insurance company, like you, working with our other vendor partners to make sure that we understand compliance, the best protocols for compliance, and how do we protect them and ourselves
within a niche, right? And so, having that specialized nature of your operation can create, unfamiliarity in the underwriting community as well. I mean, you could take your business and you could run it to, a truck insurance broker or a truck insurer, and they would decline it. You could take it and run it to, an insurer that would look for a freight broker operation, and they might consider it because of the higher auto exposure, but they fully don't understand it, right? And it creates coverage issues in that capacity. So it's good that you have the experience on both sides. And
it is hard, because that's the piece, I think, from the final mile. When I got into the industry, and that's where I met Mr. Brian here, going to the ECA conferences and learning about what the couriers are doing, and understanding everybody does it totally different. And then how do you protect yourself when some people are like, like I said, some companies run like the Wild Wild West. They don't do half of what I think they should be doing. And that was one of the things that when OnWay and I first partnered, we said, how do we change it? How do we be better? How do we get ahead of this? Because, again, when you talk about, Brian, looking as a freight broker, I saw fraud. I saw trucking companies go out of business because of bad safety scores, but we don't have those safety evaluations in the final mile space. So how do you protect yourself? By knowing that you have a good box truck driver without being too diligent, because if you cross a certain line, now they become an employee, not just an independent, motor carrier. And so it's really always learning how to maneuver and kind of steer clear in the final mile space, and making sure. And I still to this day go and I talk to companies, and I don't think they're set up properly. I think some companies and entities are not insured properly. And as you were mentioning, you listen to people and they'll go get a freight brokerage insurance, but to your point, it's not going to cover because mom in a minivan doesn't have the right coverage to protect you. And if you lose a high valued, pharmaceutical product going to a hospital, or a donor is donating like an organ and you're delivering it and you're not properly covered, you're typical brokerage insurance is follow form, right? If mom and minivan does not have that kind of insurance, neither do you. So, you're out the money. And that's where I think it's very interesting to see that people are willing to take that risk in this space. Yet, because it's easier to get into, I think that's the hard part for me, is that it's almost like so easy to get into this space and build a company that they're not properly insured, they're not properly built up. And then in the freight brokerage, we used to call bad actors, those trucking companies that would shut down and spin back up the next week as a new entity. You could do almost the same thing, right? And that's where the final mile, it's really, we're trying to understand how to build better protocols and procedures for OnWay, for our customers, to protect them and protect, the person driving the vehicle is critical for us.
It's interesting, and I'm glad you laid it out there the way that you did, because I didn't want to sound like an infomercial for insurance. But I mean, at the end of the day, what we've seen in the market is, a lot of newer policies coming into play for hired and non-owned auto. Right? Specifically spinoffs of Lloyd's of London coming in that are traditionally underwriting freight brokers. And the amazing part to me is, when you talk about, the insured, the delivery company taking the risk, I look at it from a different lens, because a lot of times they don't know. They don't know any better. And the way it's being presented to them doesn't really tell the full story in terms of how the policy is going to respond for their business. Because you hit the nail right on the head. All that stuff is follow form in the sense that, if the primary insurance coming from what should be a motor carrier or the mom and pop in their own vehicle doesn't respond, neither does ours, right? Or if their insurance doesn't respond, then you have a deductible in the amount of the limit they should have had. All that stuff is there in those contingent forms that are not designed for the courier industry, but yet you see them come into the space. Why? I think it has a lot to do with, final mile for a while has just been on the back burner, right? Until COVID came along. Once COVID hit, and it kind of poured gasoline on the industry, it kind of put a spotlight, for others to say, whoa, this is a large booming segment of the marketplace. We should pay more attention to it. So you have insurance companies looking at it, you have brokers coming into it, and it's a unique beast, and coverage
It really is, because freight brokers don't understand the space either. They think they do, because hiring a truck and hiring mom and minivan, or, somebody who's retired that wants to pick up an extra $100 a week or something like that for themselves, it's a totally different animal than contracting a trucking company to do a run on a load board. And that's, I think, the hardest part for me, is watching all these entities not operate that way, which I think is also why, not to toot our horn, but OnWay is proactively looking at how do we get ahead of it? How do we stay ahead of it? How do we build a compliance process and the insurance to back it up, that in the event that something happens, we're covered, our independent contractors covered, our customers covered, because we've seen it go wrong on the trucking side. And that's the 35 years of experience, right? I've had to fly out to that scene as a truck owner operator and identify one of my drivers, and have to be the one that calls the family to let them know their husband or father's not coming home. I've had to do those calls, and I know how tragic that is. So, we experience it here in the final mile space. We've had issues where a driver just doesn't make it where they're going, and we have to figure out where they went because they went off the grid. And then we find out from Highway Patrol or State Trooper that, there was an accident and our driver was involved. So you have those things, but the many years of experience running trucking companies and logistics companies has given me the foresight that OnWay has to be ahead of those curves and build processes, because, like I said, there's no set standard. If you opened a freight brokerage tomorrow, you need a bond, you need a DOT, you need certain things, you get your insurance, you get this, and there's just like a script you could almost write. Because again, one of the things I did for companies was I'd help them open their businesses. And so I know that, in 3 weeks, I can have a freight broker set up, and in 3 weeks, I can have a trucking company set up. But as a courier, to do it right, you really have to do things and be proactive and be seeking those processes, because nobody knows, and it's not scripted out in our industry. And in the final mile space, you don't just, like you said, you don't just get to call a company that has Progressive and say, hey, I want to open a courier service, and they go, sure, great, because they probably aren't going to have the right insurance or the right processes in place for you, and you don't have that protection, and then your customers aren't protected. And that to me is the scariest piece, because that's what usually bankrupts everybody.
All great stuff, right? And I would love to hear more about what else you're doing or have in the works at OnWay, if you're willing to share it, when it comes to compliance and monitoring and things like that, because I think that the proactive approach is what we constantly are preaching to customers and to prospects, because that's a differentiator with underwriting, right? Like being able to tell that story is huge. And further to that, I think you've been involved in some very, what I'll call difficult spaces, right? Where niches within the industry where you're doing delivery work for very demanding customers in terms of performance and demanding in terms of what you're carrying for them, right? The risk is there. And I think that the companies I've been working with you at when you've been there have all done really well with that stuff. And so it's, we hear about all the normal industry segments, but you have been able to take the companies you've been at to places that are harder and have success there. But I think that is part and parcel to the proactive approach, right?
Yeah, and it's for us, it's always been about, and for me, back in the food to the medical to pharmaceutical and we're one of the larger blood transporters in the country. The biggest thing for us is really understanding what the liability is to us, right? I always say it, and a lot of people don't like to hear it, but I say, what's the worst case scenario? And when I was doing trucking, it was, hey, a truck hits a bus full of kids, right? Worst case scenario. That you have to plan with the worst in mind and hope for the best. And so when you do that in the final mile space, you have the right things lined up. Now, some people go, well, that costs a lot. Of course it costs a lot, because again, you're insurance brokers, no offense, but you guys are going to sell us like $1 million worth of policies if we let you. But at the same time, it's knowing the risk versus the reward. And when we start learning the value of the commodity, learning the risk that's associated, and then again, there's a fine line in final mile space of what can I know about a driver without crossing the lines into making them an employee, because a lot of judges have actually came back and told us, no, that's an employee. And we're like, that's not an employee. They have the right to refuse this job, right? We have to go through the whole classification. And we've had incidences, and we had one in a city where a driver was off duty, not working for us, not doing anything else. He was driving on his own, and there was a police chase that rammed into his car. The individual was deceased after the event, but that was, everybody called us and called our customer because they all know that individual constantly. He's like 110% devoted to doing courier work for us, for that particular customer. So when the accident happened, he happened to have his badge in the car, and it mentions us. They saw the badge for the customer. They just assumed he was on duty. And so, of course, that's a liability, that's a risk, and we had to go through all that. But again, I think because we were properly proactive and we validated not on duty, we could validate times. We have all the timestamps. We have when the individual was logged in and not logged in. I mean, we do all that due diligence for a reason. It's to protect us, protect our customer. And when that incident occurred, it's crazy because our customer actually, thanked us because we were so diligent in our process, and we actually had all the records to prove that, we weren't doing anything, they weren't doing anything, and that, I believe, helps everybody, is making sure we're always proactive in that.
Yeah. And look, unfortunately, I happen to know about that one too, right? But unfortunately, in that scenario, you still have legal costs that get rung up, right? And I think that's the part where you guys do everything right. This isn't even an on the clock situation. It occurs. The insurance coverage is still responding to fund the legal defense and all the legal work that has to happen to get everybody removed from it that doesn't really belong there anyways, right? It's a sad state of affairs on the legal system in the country, but also, hey, I'm glad we got the coverage right? Like that's the goal right there.
Well, and you look at that individual scenario, and that was the family that came after us thinking that individual was working, and they just assumed that individual was working because he did work, he worked quite a bit with us. But at the same time, to your point, I mean, we're racking up. I want to say I think it's still lingering, but it's one of those things that just continuously keeps raising its head. And we have quite a bit of legal expenses popping up from that, and having the right insurance protects us because, we did nothing wrong, to your point. we did everything right, and yet we still have a very large bill that has to be paid to the attorneys to protect us from something that we weren't involved in.
Yeah, I think the frustration we hear, and you've certainly experienced it in your career, right, is the even in the claims that seem very cut and dry and should go fast and close out quick. Sometimes you feel like you get into them and it's like a game of whack-a-mole. Like you solve one issue on it, the next one pops up, and there's this constant frustration. And look, we share that, right? There's two scenarios I think we see historically where things go away quickly and easily, and one is cheap and $0 paid out, and that's a really quick, not at fault, move on with life. And the other one is there's usually a fatality involved and you were definitely at fault, and the insurance carrier can't pay the $1 million limit fast enough to close it out and be done, right? Everything else in between is usually a little bit longer and a little bit messy.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think that's where being proactive and being able to sleep at night is a big deal, right? If you're not properly protected, you're almost staying up at night worrying about these what if scenarios. But if you are properly protected, and that was the big thing when I came to OnWay, is making sure that we put our best foot forward. And that's, I think, why, a lot of people ask us, like, why is OnWay growing today when all these companies are hurting, they're suffering, they're laying off, they're doing this? We're growing because I think it's because we're proactively protecting our customers. We're proactively insuring them. So, the word indemnification gets thrown out in our industry, like, oh, we'll indemnify that customer. Not a lot of people can because they don't have the right insurance. And I know several people that are probably underinsured, probably, self-insured, that they just I have self-insured, and then they get a big bill and they disappear or they get sold.
Lance, the repeating theme I keep hearing from you on this call today is being proactive, right? Absolutely. And so, we've got some, webinars going on that are all dedicated to safety and loss control. So I think it's pretty timely because ultimately, what we hear in the marketplace, from clients or customers such as yourself is, what can I do to make myself look good in the marketplace or in the eyes of the underwriter? It's no secret that the underwriting community in this space continues to get warmer, right? And continues to get less in terms of carriers that are willing to offer coverage, in the final mile space, so you're seeing that general constriction because of performance in the marketplace. And so now it's a matter of, okay, well, then the onus gets on to the operator, and what can they do from a safety and loss control or driver safety or compliance to help mitigate their risk, so that they are, number one, performing well when it comes to their loss runs. So that's right there in black and white to the underwriter. But number two, tell a good story, so it's not just dumb luck because you haven't hit anybody yet. It is actually backed up by the fact of things that you are proactively doing to run a good operation. Or any tips you might be able to offer in that capacity?
Yeah, and that comes from running trucking companies in my day. And, I had a fleet of about 100 trucks once upon a time ago, and we had some tools and resources that we put in place a long time ago that kind of stuck with me, was that you could put a driver in front of a video screen, walk them through some scenarios that they may not be thinking about, and really get their kind of brain wrapped around it before it happens, and proactively question, give them little quizzes. But we saw this, and I used the tool several years ago, and Tom and Levy and I bounced the idea around for a while. And we finally just launched it. We're in the process right now of launching a learning management software that is proactively, we're building driver training programs because, again, if not being from the industry and coming in, if somebody said, hey, could you move this package and you can make, $50, $100 every time or whatever it came out to be, you jump in your car, you go make a delivery, and you're like, yeah, sure, no problem. But what you're not thinking about is, do I need to make sure I have good tires because winter's coming? Do I, make sure that I'm carrying dry ice? I keep my windows ventilated and open because I'm transporting something that dry ice is going to make me, because I didn't know that until I got here, because I've transported dry ice in a truck, in a semi truck. I've never transported it in a car. I never thought that a styrofoam cooler, you might start smelling something and it's odorless. So you get foggy, you get dizzy. So it's little tips like that. If we can put that in front of drivers that a customer might need dry ice, or put that in front of a driver who's going into the winter season, like check your wipers, check your tires, make sure you're ready to go for the season. Keeping people safer and proactively telling them and coaching them through it, I think is one of the big advantages. And that's what we're moving towards today, is trying to get ahead of them. So to your point, we're not just throwing somebody at the dartboard and hoping that they make it to pick up and delivery, and that, our insurance company's like, this one, throw a dart at the dartboard. Hopefully they have a decent driver record, because you just need somebody to make a delivery. I think if we can proactively train, all the different independent contractors, we can coach our teams and get everybody. What we're building is an ecosystem of better drivers, better prepared, customers are more satisfied, right? We're building this process and procedure. And again, I think it's the difference in the caliber of drivers that are going to show up, because the driver that we're coaching and training is more likely to show up at our customer properly dressed, right? Their attire is better. Their vehicle is going to make it. It's just more of a proactive approach, which means I'm not going to be calling Brian anytime soon, because hopefully my driver's done their due diligence out of the gate.
Well, I think it probably also, it leaves your drivers, right, feeling like they're valued and cared for, right? So there's that part of it too, where they're less apt to want to leave that scenario because they know it's a team effort. And yeah, they're a contractor, but so what? Like, they know you still have some of their best interests in mind. You want them to do well. You want them to succeed and make money, and just do it safely, right? And I think the cool part about this is we hear a lot, well, they're contractors. We can't tell them what to do. Right. But you can, I'm guessing, you can build your contract to have certain requirements in it, and you can circumvent some of those things.
Well, and I think it's not even telling them what to do. It's just being proactive and getting ahead of it and saying, hey, winter's coming. Did you check your tires? Did you do this? Yeah. Did you check your wipers? Are you safely operating? Have you done a maintenance on your vehicle? Because again, in the trucking industry, we did daily pre-trips. We did monthly maintenance schedules. We had quarterly schedules. We had safety meetings, and you had that as employee-based places. But how do you do it with independent contractors? We could suggest. And I think that's the difference, is we are suggesting and we're asking them, like, hey, did you check your tires? But if we make them watch a 30-second video just to say, have you checked your tires? Have you checked this? Sending them out like a little video clip just to kind of pre-notify them, like, hey, we care. Hopefully you're doing okay. And hopefully you're prepared for winter. I think it's getting ahead. And like you said, Brian, we're changing their mindset, that they don't feel like they're just doing it on their own, that they don't know what they're doing. Because again, if I was driving, I probably wouldn't be thinking of those things. So if we could just stay ahead of the curve and be in front of them, I think our safety goes up, our customer deliveries improve, our driver pool as a whole will improve, because of the fact that, again, we're 24/7, 365. We have to be there because we're delivering pharmaceuticals, auto parts, medical, we got everything in between. And we're very big on making sure that our customers know that we care about them and we want to uphold their standards. But to your point, we can't tell a driver, wear this, do that, do this. But as independent contractors, we can make them feel like they have a voice and that we can listen to them. But at the same time, we care about them in a way that we want to keep them safe and help them do the right things so that it protects all of us.
Yeah. So you created a nice culture of caring and safety,
yeah.
Right? And in a nutshell, which is awesome. Puz, I'm going to ask you this, because we both have kids that are doing their driving right now, student driving. And this question came up yesterday in my house, and I had no idea the answer to it. Minimum tread depth in Ohio. Do you know what it is?
Not in Ohio, but I don't know what Ohio is.
230 seconds. And I thought to myself, when he asked the question, I went, I have no idea, right? Like, why would you know that past the driving test? But then I think, and I put myself always back in like the professional driver's shoes, right? And driving around all day long and putting tire wear and tear on it. And then the winters that we all get to experience up here. And you're like, yeah, kind of important to know that, especially if that's your livelihood. You're in the vehicle all day. And like, it has a massive effect on driving in snow and ice. So,
yeah.
To that point, those little, it's like Lance has developed TikTok for delivery drivers, right? Little digestible 30-second clips where it just goes, oh yeah, crap, you got to remember that. And you need to take care of it.
Yeah.
I'm just glad your child is so studious. Whenever I see my child taking the driver quizzes, she's just letting it run in the background till the time clock goes, and then she can click next to the next screen. And I'm like, hey, man, take a test here. But okay.
Maybe we can enroll the kids to be contractors for Lance so they could get his.
I don't have a video for that.
Oh, man. Well, tell us, we had one last thing I know I wanted to talk about with you, because I thought this was a great back and forth. And to your point earlier about always trying to figure out, what's your liability? What's your worst case scenario, right? We had a customer of yours that was looking for very specific coverage on the cargo side of things. And in essence, in the real world, the value of the goods was nothing, right? But the value to them for what it was needed for was very, very costly. So they needed to see a specific limit. And we went to the insurance markets, and Lance and I had a lot of back and forth on it. And at the end of the day, I don't know that either of us were that thrilled with what the outcome was, because we still had to get a limit from an insurer, even though we are all sitting here saying there's really no value here. But to get the piece of paper, there was a decent cost to it.
I wouldn't even say there was no value to it. I think that the hard part is nobody could put a number to it because it's volunteered. So that particular customer you're talking about, it's blood. And the interesting thing is, because we deal with probably, I think we have 5, 6 blood companies, 7 blood companies that we do business with, and every one of them is slightly different. But most of them will tell you specifically, like per unit, it is X. Per platelet, it's Y, per this, and we kind of just know that, right? So that's our blood. This particular customer you're talking about, the hard part was the language for them. Really, they struggled with it and we had to do the homework for them. It's like, what is the value of a unit when you don't know, because it's voluntarily given? So I walk in, I donate blood. What is the value of that? It's free. And that's where they were struggling. And to your point, Brian, that was the hard part. They wanted to put a number on it. And we said, what's the number? And they couldn't give us a number. So we had to go back and talk to all of our other entities and say, what does a typical unit go for? And then really kind of break it down, and then proactively come back to the customer and say, do you understand this is what you can and can't charge? And that was the hard part, because really it's the value that they put on it when it's delivered to the hospital, I guess, is the way it comes down to, right? It's different than selling a widget, because there's time and labor and materials that goes into a widget, and that was the hard part. They couldn't tell us what the time was to draw the blood, what the labor was to draw the blood, what all those costs were that goes into it. And that's where I was like, we just got to figure something out, because we can't just write a blank check.
No, it was a process, right? And I think that the part that I'll always say I appreciate from you and any customer that does it is the proactive approach and the discussion back and forth. Like, we always say that let's talk about the issues before they're an issue. We'd rather be ready for the fire than have no idea it's coming and then be battling the fire and no one's enjoying that experience, right? So I think thank you for that. You've always been great about it. And I'll go one step further in terms of what you proactively been doing. Don't have to talk specifics, right? But you looked at a segment of the business and said, there's something we want to do with this, but for a lot of reasons, including risk management, we want to separate this out from the operation, the other operations. Right. So talk a little bit about the mindset there and what you were going for with that kind of diversification, I call it, or reorganization.
Yeah. So I think the big thing is that we see in the on-demand, it's very easy to separate and pass a classification test, right? In on-demand, because there's clearly an offer, an acceptance, an order, point A to point B, and it's kind of like freight brokering in my mind. It's very transactional. Here's an order. Here's where you pick up. Here's where you deliver. How you get there in between, use your GPS. Good luck. And it's very cut and dry, and it's very simplified. In the auto parts world, it gets a little tricky, because again, people are wanting somebody to come into their facility to pick up parts and deliver them to their customers. And some customers want you to pick up cash. Some customers want you to use their apps and their tools and their systems and their processes, and they want someone for 8 hours. And then the law states that if you hire someone for 8 hours, they're an employee. And it's really understanding how to differentiate that kind of world and space to where, we're not an hourly contractor. We're basically providing a service. So we're proactively, and again, this is where the vision of OnWay has changed, is we've segmented out some of our different, if somebody needed hourly, we've kind of coached and consulted and advised to change the mindset over there to become in like slightly a different on demand, where we have routes, we have schedules, we have orders that we go from A to B. And if we can do that, then, we protect them from misclassification. We protect us from misclassification, because, some of these independent contractors, they'll do a couple of these runs and then they go do an Uber, or they'll go do a DoorDash in between. And it's making sure that everybody's on the same thing, that they can have multiple work, and multiple work is where we justify their separation of duties, right? That they're not just working for us, or so that's kind of one of the things that we've had to do is look at it, because on demand is in our medical space and our blood and all that stuff is very easy to classify as courier work, and we easily order transactional, whereas our auto parts was a little different. So it's taken a minute for our business and our culture and our customers to get wrapped around this new concept. And so we're working on new technology for that space right now to change that environment into an orderly piece to protect them, protect us. It's just a different world.
Yeah. Well, but I think to your point, like if you're not coming at that with your experience and what you've seen in the different segments of the industry, right? There's a lot of folks that wouldn't get as granular on what the risk was and kind of want to proactively approach it. It would be more of like a, hey, we're going to do this, let's see what happens type move. And we see that, right? We see that, and it doesn't end well.
Well, and that's part of the thing is, we've sat in some courts where a judge literally says this person's an employee, and even the driver's like, I'm not an employee, I have a job over here, I do this, I do that. They're gig workers. And a judge in one particular state literally argued with us, told us that's an employee, and our attorney stopped talking. The driver was arguing with the judge saying, I'm not an employee, I have 3 different companies I courier for, and it was literally almost a comedy show to watch the driver and the judge arguing on the screen for like 30 minutes, screaming at each other. And, and you're just sitting there going, and we are the ones taking that risk and that burden. And that's the kind of stuff that catapulted us to today, where we said, we have to break this out. We have to protect ourselves as well as our customers. And we have independent contractors who, like you were talking about, Brian, COVID time, they were coming in and they were saying, hey, I worked 9.5 hours. I want overtime. And we're like, there's no overtime. You worked, a shift or something like that. So that's where we started changing that and saying, how do we protect our customers from that? How do we do that? So now we can send in drivers to do like a sweep or a route, and then we'll send a different driver to do that. That way, we have multiple drivers on site to protect them from that kind of concept of needing overtime or something, we can't think of.
Yeah. Go through, to the extent you can, if you don't mind, sharing with us industries you service, geographies. I mean, I know it's broad, but give people a flavor for what OnWay is doing and where you guys are crushing it.
Yeah, we like to say which is funny, we landed Portland, Maine, and we have Portland, Oregon, and we have everything in between, is like kind of like what I like to say. For one customer, we literally have Portland, Maine, and Portland, Oregon, which was funny. But we do service, different industries. We have blood. Like I said, we have 6 or 7 blood companies. We have a couple pharmaceutical companies today. We have several hospital networks where, some are small and some are larger. We're actually in talks right now with a very large hospital network. So because we're in over 40 states today, I think on the on-demand side alone, we're in 120 something cities with the medical side. And so we're doing everything from, like I said, blood, specimens, we're picking up samples from hospitals and doctors' offices to patients. We even do some patient home deliveries. We've kind of embraced that aspect of it. So we're seeing a wide variety. And really the fun part for us is, we've had very little sales effort. It's all been word of mouth. Like, we're doing a blood customer who we deliver to a hospital. The hospital says, who's doing that work for you? We need some better service. And then we take on that hospital, and then we deliver to one of their clinics or labs, and they call us and say, hey, we want, some of that service too. And we've kind of scripted it out, but it's really interesting. We're now kind of moving into different markets and spaces, but the pharmaceutical, medical, they're very embracing of some of the tools and the technology that OnWay is rolling out. And I think it's helping our growth drastically. And, it's kind of fun to watch. You go to another city and you're like, oh, well, here we are. We just took 124. So we actually have about 5 more cities in the pipeline right now. So we're very excited.
Awesome. It's always the best growth through the good guy network, right? Like to your point, you don't have to be out there pounding the pavement. You're just performing and proactively monitoring risk for everybody, and the results kind of speak for themselves. It's great.
Yeah, OnWay's big on walk the walk, not talk the talk, and I think that's a testament to our service and our dispatch team here. We're 24/7, 365, and we when you talk about planning and proactive, OnWay really is very big on making sure all of our team members know what to do at 2 a.m. or afternoon, because we always say logistics never sleeps, and that's a testament, because usually nothing goes wrong during the day like it does at night. It always goes wrong in the middle of the night when everybody's sleeping and my phone's ringing, and so. Yep. But that's who we are. That's how we were built, and I think that's the fun part of what we do.
Yeah, agree. You want to wrap it up, Puzz?
I think we're good to go. My teenage daughter needs her room back.
I hope that stays in the video when they cut the final. All right, we'll bring it home on a close here. So, all right, well, hey, Lance, appreciate the time. Thank you for joining us. Awesome information share in terms of, the mindset and the culture that you have helped develop at OnWay. And, the folks are all great to work with. We appreciate having you as a customer, and certainly appreciate you coming on and chatting with us. You're always welcome back. Anytime you want to come talk shop with us, we're ready for it.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you guys having me on and working with you over the years, and hopefully we'll see you at the ECA.
Well, we will definitely see you at the ECA.
Have a good one.
Thanks, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.